Hello, guys and gals, and welcome. So today we're going to be talking about something fun. We're going to be talking about how Venom sucks. And you might be wondering what the hell I'm talking about. Like, why does Venom suck? I thought Venom was a good skill. I thought Venom did additional damage. I thought Venom had poison. I thought it stopped regeneration. We're going to cover a lot of things today about Venom. And we're not going to be talking about PvP. I do think Venom still has good uses within PvP because it helps get you past like energy shield sorceresses and things like that. So this is strictly going to be a PvM conversation about Venom. But for the most part, when we talk about Venom, we're going to be talking about both the casted version and the free version. Um, it's kind of hard to separate the two. I think most people are using the free version that comes from like treachery or grief or something like that. And we're going to kind of like talk about how it can potentially like sabotage your damage output in a myriad of ways, especially if you are a AoE melee or AoE ranged character. It can definitely hurt you overall. But before we start talking about the cons of the ability, let's talk about the pros of the ability. So first off, what does Venom do well? Well, first off, it does increase the damage of Poison Dagger, but Poison Dagger sucks, so it hardly really matters. But if you are using Poison Dagger, you probably want to add Venom into your build because Poison Dagger, Poison Javelin, and Plague Javelin are three of the very few situations where Venom is actually forced to abandon its rule set and adhere to the rule set of the ability that is using it, essentially. And it's kind of like an order of operations thing. Poison Dagger, Poison Javelin, Plague Javelin are above Venom in the order of operations, which means they force Venom to do what they want them to do instead of what Venom wants to do, which is the only reason that they're good because their Venom is not working as it normally does. However, Poison Javelin and Poison Dagger are both pretty terrible skills, whereas Plague Javelin is probably the only really good one in the lot, and having Venom for Plague Javelin is important. So if you are using any of these abilities and you're trying to get the most out of them, you probably do want to include Venom in your build. It does work decently as an added poison damage if none is used, like in terms of like weapon poison damage or charms or anything of the sort. So if you have poison damage from other sources, you might be better off just not using Venom. And I know this is difficult because Venom is on things like grief, it's on things like treachery, and so it's kind of a little difficult to get away from Venom. But you would probably be better off just simply using a poison small charm than you would be using Venom in most scenarios when it comes to melee or range characters. And I'll demonstrate this, but we need to talk about really quickly about how Venom works. And it is kind of a pain in the butt to explain Venom to people because it doesn't really like sink in unless you see a drastic example. And I do have a drastic example here for you so you can get a good idea of how Venom actually changes damage output. So first off, let me show you the practical example, and then I'll go over the math, and we'll talk about the two. So here I have a character. This is GGM Anthrax. Anthrax is set up with massive amounts of poison damage, small charms, these 451 poisons. These are insanely rare and hard to find, but I'm basically using an entire inventory of them. And as you can see, I have 14,000 poison damage with multi-shot, and with guided arrow, I'm looking at 19,000. So I have more with the single target. It's because there is still a penalty on multi-shot, unfortunately. But basically, what's going on here is I have these poison damage charms summed up. They're over 12 seconds, so I get a lot of poison damage. I hit the targets. They're going to poison out. You're going to see them slowly bleed to death. If I go up here and I shoot at Eldritch, I can shoot multiple times to make sure everything's poisoned. But once everything is poisoned, it's really just a matter of waiting until they all die. And it does take a little bit of time for them to all die, but they will slowly bleed out over those 12 seconds because the poison damage is going to continue to tick over the entirety of those 12 seconds. Now, 14,000 poison damage is a lot. It is definitely a lot. If I switch over to something like a Grief, which has Venom proc, and I go ahead and I attack some monsters in like the Bloodmoor or something like that, let's just go thwack a couple monsters in the face until we get our Venom to tick. You'll notice that it says we have 18,000 Venom, or poison damage, with our Grief on right now. And when Venom actually procs, notice it goes down to 2,457. we've now lost the majority of our poison damage because it's no longer applying that poison damage over the same time period anymore. And what do I mean by this? Is that it's taking all of these charms and it's actually reducing them down to the 0.4 seconds that Venom is. And then when I go out and I actually attack monsters with this particular character, you're going to notice that I'm no longer able to poison the monsters down completely. So that one shot did not kill the monster. The monster is now not green, and they're able to regenerate. You notice his HP is regenerating back up because of the fact that I have to hit him multiple times. He's not staying poisoned. I can't maintain that poison on him without hitting him multiple times. Now, in the most technicalist of terms, if you are able to attack quickly enough, you will not lose damage with this setup. But the main issue and the main irredeeming value of this is that you do have to continually attack multiple times to obtain the same damage output that you had before without Venom. And to get into this, the nitty-gritty of how this works and why Venom is basically sabotaging this particular build, we have to talk about why Venom is actually lowering our damage output and not increasing it in any way, shape, or form. We're actually losing damage output through this. And to do this, we have to show the math. So 0.4 seconds is basically the equivalent of 10 frames. The entire game is set up into frames. 1 second is the equivalent of 25 frames. And we know for a fact that our poison does damage over 12 seconds, which we multiply that by 25. And we get about 300 frames. In 0.4 seconds, we only have 10 frames. So that means that we've lost 290 frames of our poison. Because the way that this works is it only applies the poison damage over 10 frames. And it doesn't matter how much poison damage you have. It doesn't matter if you've got 10 trillion poison damage. It's still only going to take 10 frames of that 10 trillion and apply it to the monster and throw away the rest. Now, if you continue to attack for the entirety of this process, and if you are to attack once every 0.4 frames, you can maintain that damage. So, for instance, in this particular case, we've got 12 seconds times our 25 frames, which is 300 frames, and we have to attack once every 10 frames, which means that we've got to attack 30 times to maintain the previous 14,000 damage that we had before we cast Venom. And this does mean that things like missing or blocking or whatever are going to subtract from this. And this is to maintain the same damage that we had before. We've got to attack 30 times to maintain our damage. And this is all due to the fact that it's just dividing everything down into smaller and smaller numbers. So right now I have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. So I've got 24 451s. We take our 451s, multiply that by 24. We end up with 10,824,000 damage, 824. We've also got 90% skill damage, so let's add our 90% poison skill damage, which brings us up to about 20k, which is in line with what our guided arrow says at around 19k. Of course, doesn't say that now because we have Venom running. But you have to take this and you have to divide it down. Right? So first thing we have to do is just divide it by 12, which will give us our per second, which is 1,713 per second. And then we have to divide this by 25, which is going to give us our exact number of seconds, our frame damage, which is 68.552. And then we're going to multiply that by 10 frames, which is going to get us our damage that we're actually obtaining from the effect. So out of the 20,000 damage that we have at the current moment in poison damage, when Venom is cast, instead of doing 20,000 poison damage per shot, we are now only doing 685 poison damage per shot. Now, we also get the damage from Venom itself, and then we have the physical damage added on too, which is complicating things. But for the most part, you're not really getting very much damage at all. And you have to do this as many times as you can. And what is that? 30 times, right? So we multiply this by 30, and we end up with 20,565. So we have to attack 30 times to dish out that same damage. And that's why things get really wonky with Venom. So let's go over the cons now that I've kind of explained things, and we're going to talk about this together. So first off, poison prevents regeneration, right? But Venom prevents poison from stopping regeneration by reducing the duration to zero point 0.4 seconds or 10 frames, which requires constant reapplication at a very fast rate to stop regen. So what does this mean? Well, if I'd go out into any of the areas in the game and I attack a monster, you'll notice that the monster will slowly and horribly die from the poison over a long period of time. It's just a matter of hitting them once, and then you watch as the poison slowly kills them. Right? They can't regenerate during this time period. They are stuck with this poison on them, and as long as they are green, then they are not regenerating. And it's like an anti-Hulk, essentially, right? Because Hulk is green and he regenerates. So whenever they're green, they don't regenerate, right? Now, because Venom causes the poison to go down to a lower duration, you basically no longer get that anti-regeneration property. So if I hit the monster with poison, their poison will go away in 0.4 seconds, and then the monster will start to regenerate back again relatively quickly. So in the case of the Crusher, you see the poison was applied instantly, and then just like that, his HP is slowly regenerating back up from that damage. Okay. Now, if you're fighting a single monster, it's not such a big deal because on a single monster, it doesn't really matter because you're going to attack that monster multiple times. However, it does matter on large groups. Which is kind of a big deal for characters that dish out mainly single target damage. So if you're like a whirlwind barbarian or whatever, and we'll talk about that later. But basically, just the biggest con of Venom here that I'm trying to get across is that it doesn't stop regeneration due to its very fast rate and need to be reapplied multiple times. Now, you can technically stop regeneration on one target with Venom if you apply it every 10 frames. So if you attack at 0.4 seconds or faster and you never miss, you can essentially stop regeneration on that one target, but you're never going to be able to stop regeneration with Venom on multiple targets. It's just not possible. Damage can be interrupted by any form of damage that hits the target during those 10 frames, removing large portions of damage during that time frame. So, for instance, and this is all poison, not just Venom, but poison damage is done on a per frame basis, and any damage that comes in during that frame will stop the poison from attacking the target during that frame. And due to the nature of Venom, you are required to attack extremely fast, at least once every 0.4 seconds to maintain the same damage that you would have had without it, which means that you are going to interrupt your own damage as you're attacking as fast as you possibly can. On top of this, you're probably not going to be able to maintain Venom at all because you're going to have misses, blocks, monsters are going to run out of range, teleports. So there's constantly going to be gaps in the way that Venom works, and you're going to lose damage every time that there's a gap. Attacking faster than once per 4 seconds, 0.4 seconds, will reduce your poison damage. As we talked about earlier, anything that interrupts a frame will cause the poison damage to stop for that frame. And this is because poison damage does not stack, and every additional hit more than once every 0.4 seconds will remove one of the 10 frames of the poison, lowering the damage output as a result. Venom can overwrite a longer, more potent poison if the venom has a greater tick rate but less overall damage, which makes it very bad for group play. Let's use this Zon as an example. This is probably the easiest example that we can use. Let's pretend we had 2 of these Amazons in a group, right? Let's say you had one set up just like me, with the 451 poison charms, and she's firing off attacks at monsters, and they're being poisoned, right? So they're being poisoned, and they're dying over these 12 seconds. Then you have another Amazon set up exactly like this one, except she's using Venom. Now, because she's using Venom, she's going to have more poison damage than me, technically, because the bit rate or the damage per per frame is going to be higher than my damage per frame. And to give you an example of this, we can just simply take our number. So we have 14,000 poison damage when we multi-shot. We divide that by our 12 seconds, and then we divide that again by our 25 frames, which gives us a total bit rate of 46.66666 poison damage per frame. Okay, so that's our per frame poison damage, right? Now let's take the per frame poison damage of our Venom version, which is 1,814. Seems like less, right? well, 1,814 divided by 10 gives us a bit rate of 181.4. And of course, we probably have some physical damage in there, but it's kind of hard to separate the physical damage out. But basically, what you end up with is, because Venom is applying its own damage on top of the damage that you're dishing out, you have this odd situation. And of course, I think this is, I might need to run this a little bit differently. How can I separate out the physical? Physical. Oh, I could just do punch. That's what I can do. I can just do punch. Well, no, I can't do punch. Because I would need a melee weapon. Well, there's our regular attack. Alright, so let's use the regular attack versus... I'm trying to think how I can actually get this. But the moral of the story is that adding in Venom causes the bit rate to be higher and overwrite my poison. So if I shoot a monster, the monster's poisoned for 12 seconds, I'm going to be doing like 20,000 or 14,000 damage or whatever, right? And the other player has Venom, and they fire the same shot. They're going to have slightly higher bit rate than me. And what's going to happen is they are going to stop my 12-second poison. They're going to apply their 0.4-second poison. My 12-second poison is going to be canceled out completely. And they're going to remove the damage from the monster. And this means that in that scenario, if I'm doing 14,000 damage and they are only doing, say, I'll even round it up and say they're doing 3,000 damage, then they have canceled out 11,000 of my damage by touching the target with Venom. It's actually kind of crazy when you think about it this way, because there's a lot of this going on in the game world where somebody may have a better poison that lasts a longer period of time that could dish out more damage, and the Venom is going to cause that poison damage to get snuffed out before it can dish out all of its total poison damage. So in this particular situation, let's talk about like AoE attacks. So a 0.4 duration is not going to be better than a longer duration with the same damage output in an AoE scenario. An example, let's pretend I'm using Whirlwind on a Barbarian. Maybe I'm using Fury on a Druid, Zeal on a Paladin, Multi-Shot on an Amazon, Defend on a Zon. Whatever it may be, longer duration poison is always going to be better than a shorter duration poison like Venom. So, for instance, if I go out here into the Bloodmoor, or let's go back to Canyon of the Magi. If I go to the Canyon of Magi and I'm fighting a whole bunch of monsters as a multi-shot Amazon, and I fire off one attack that does a large amount of poison damage to multiple targets, I'm now getting a hell of a lot more damage output because I can allow that poison damage to tick on every single target, even if I'm not necessarily near them at that given time. Right? But the difference is that if I use Venom, if I go ahead and activate Venom again, which isn't really that hard to do, especially if you're using a Grief, now my poison damage has a lot less flexibility, and if I fire off a shot, the monsters will not continue to tick for the entire duration. And there's no guarantee that I'm going to be able to hit every single monster for the entire duration of Venom to keep it running for the full poison damage. So I'm effectively losing damage output by doing this. Not only am I losing damage output from the poison, but I am also, in turn, having a harder time killing monsters because the monsters are not staying poisoned and they are now regenerating. Poison is one of the easiest ways to stop regeneration, but Venom essentially completely kills that. So as an AoE damage character, you notice that like I went from being able to fire one multi-shot, poisoning an entire group of monsters and just laughing as they bled to death, to now I have to continually fire shot after shot after shot after shot after shot to hopefully get the same amount of damage that I was getting before with just one ability, just one shot basically. I could walk into the zone, I could fire one shot, deal 14,000 poison damage to everything within range essentially, as long as I hit them of course, maybe fire 2 or 3 more times to make sure everything is nicely poisoned, and then just move on. And this is going to happen for basically any melee character. If you're a Zeal or Paladin inside of a big group of monsters and you're Zealing multiple targets, being able to apply a poison damage to them, even if it's just one poison charm in your inventory, is going to stop the regeneration of the monsters, and it's going to deal out more damage overall than Venom will. Whirlwind barbs, as you whirlwind through the pack, and then you stop, and then you whirlwind back through the pack. If the monsters stay poisoned for the entire duration until you come back, then they're not going to regenerate, and they're going to take more damage as you're whirlwinding back and forth through the pack. Whereas if you're using Venom, they're only going to take that instant tick of poison damage, and then they're going to start regenerating again. Unless, of course, you run, say, Prevent Monster Heal on your character. Just in general, when it comes to any kind of melee or range character that's using any kind of AoE ability, you're far better off without Venom and utilizing something like just a 100 poison damage small charm in your inventory, or like honestly, a couple poison damage small charms would be nice. They're actually it's actually really handy to have a little bit of poison damage on a character, but Venom just is not it. Um, and this is really kind of like the issue here, and I can actually give you some numbers, by the way. So the issue is that if I tag one monster with 2 equivalent tick rate poisons, but one lasts 10 seconds and the other one lasts 0.4 seconds, even though they are doing the same tick rate of damage, the 10-second poison will tick longer and dish out 25 times the damage that Venom will. And you might think 25 times is a number that I pulled out of my butt. It's not a number that I pulled out of my butt. It's actually just a simple calculation. If Venom only lasts for 0.4 seconds, which we know is 10 frames, and a poison charm lasts for 10 seconds, and you multiply that by 25 to get the frame rate of the entire poison, which is 250 frames, and then you look at it, if Venom only lasts 10 frames and your 10-second poison is lasting at 250 frames, that means that technically your 10-second poison charm is probably going to do about 25 times the amount of damage that Venom is doing if they're around the same amount of poison damage as each other. Because you're going to have a poison that's going to tick over that entire duration rather than you're going to have something that only hits for 10 frames. And it's just simple math. You take 10 and you multiply it by 25 and you get 250. All in all, I don't think Venom is like the worst skill in the entire game. I mean, it might be close. But there's one thing for sure. It doesn't really do what I think everyone kind of like has an imagination in their head that they think it does. And I think more often than not, it actually makes a character worse than makes a character better. Because it causes issues with stopping regeneration. It lowers your poison damage overall, and if you're using any kind of poison charms in your inventory at all, it can actually make those poison charms worse as a result, and completely stop any kind of anti-regeneration that you might have in the process. I don't particularly think that using Venom like on an assassin, just simply like as an addendum, is necessarily the most horrible thing, because if you can get a bunch of free skill levels in it, you're not like dumping a bunch of points into it. It is going to give you an additional amount of damage. You can also stop regeneration by using Prevent Monster Heal for the most part, which is nice. However, Prevent Monster Heal doesn't work on like uber bosses and things like that. You need Open Wounds, and even though Open Wounds can stop regeneration, Poison can also stop regeneration, which means that if you go to the uber bosses, in a situation where you don't have Venom, but you grab a couple poison charms instead, and you also use Open Wounds, you might be more likely to end up in a scenario where the boss never regenerates, because in the occasion where Open Wounds doesn't apply quickly enough, the poison can handle the stopping of the regeneration for a very small period of time, whereas Venom's not going to. So Venom won't stop the regeneration in the case where Open Wounds fails either. And on top of that, you just tend to lose damage overall with Venom. Unless you are an extremely fast like kicker, or like you can dish out multiple hits within that, within a single second. So obviously you're going to have to put out at least one frame, one attack every 0.4 seconds. You can maintain your damage output with the charms. And it's not as if you're losing the damage of the charms, but you have to maintain the attack speed to maintain the damage from the charms, which is something that kind of sucks. Especially if I can just walk outside of town and I can just simply tap one button and poison monsters with 14,000 poison damage. Like going from this, which is just being able to laugh. I mean, like poison a monster and literally just laugh as they slowly bleed away into nothingness, where I don't even have to put my hands on the keyboard, to this, which is where I hit a monster with the poison effect, they take a small amount of poison damage, and then they start regenerating. I mean, it's a massive change that's not for the better. And in the majority of situations, I would say like 99% of the situations that you're going to be in with Venom, it's not doing you any favors. It's causing your regeneration to fail, it's causing the monsters to be able to regenerate easier. It's stopping your poison damage output. It's sabotaging other players' poison damage output. It's forcing you to attack more often to get the same amount of damage. It's causing your poison charms to do less than what they would normally do in most given situations. I mean, overall, I think that Venom might be in contending for one of the worst skills in the game, because not necessarily because it's completely and utterly useless, but because it sabotages the character in such an insidious way. It makes you think you have something special. It makes you think you've got something that might actually be worthwhile, but for the most part, all it's really doing is making your character worse in the majority of situations. Now, there are a few situations where Venom can be useful. We already talked about some of them: Poison Dagger, Poison Javelin, Plague Javelin, and specifically on an Assassin. Like if you're running really high level Venom and, you know, like you're attacking extremely fast, like with something like Dragon Tail, you can usually attack quickly enough to maintain the poison damage, and the free poison damage that you get from the skill itself kind of works out to your advantage in that scenario. But for the most part, I don't really think even putting 1 point in Venom is worth it if you're just going to 1 point it. I think for the most part, you'd be better off just simply grabbing like one decent poison small charm and putting in your inventory rather than using Venom. Video's already been going for 27 minutes, so I think that'll be it. If you guys have any questions about Venom, maybe more specific scenarios where you think Venom might be useful, I'd be more than happy to discuss them with you. Like I said, it's not always useless, but it's mostly useless. It's rather unfortunate that Venom is on some of the more powerful items in the game, like Grief and Treachery, because you're kind of forced to use them if you use those items. Anyway, as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when I'm just ranting about Venom being useless. And as always, keep watching.